half of the class, I think. It's the largest research group I've ever come across, like those physics groups. So we have Emily Chard, Mackenzie, Corbett, Rayne, Crosetta, Jack Hayward, Amanda Kuiack, Nathan McIntyre, Chris Meier, and Joey Renaud. And they're going to speak about accuracy of ECG rhythm recognition by paramedic students. Please give them a hand. Okay, thanks, Alan. So like Alan said, we're going to focus on if primary care paramedic students at Fanshawe College can accurately identify 3-lead, lead 2 ECG rhythms. I'm Jack Hayward. This is Rayne, Crosetta, Emily Chard, Amanda Kuiack, Mackenzie, Corbett, Nathan McIntyre, Chris Meier, and Joey Renaud. So we're going to start our presentation with Emily Chard talking about our literature review, methods, study design, and setting.
So first of all, I want to apologize that you have to listen to me for this long. Rayne is sick and doesn't have a voice, so I'm going to take over her part. So just to start you off with a bit about our literature review. So our first search was done through CINAHL and Medline. We tried to get it down to the latest being 2006 to exclude articles that were older than 10 years. We ruled out articles just based on a relevant subject matter. And after we did our first search, we found only approximately 2 relevant articles. So we actually had to redo our search and add in a lot more including factors such as doctors, nurses, nursing students, residents, that type of thing. So for the first search, we got 2 relevant articles, and in the second one, we got 91 results with only 5 more relevant articles. So overall, we chose 7 articles to further examine for our literature review. Noted in our presentation are the most applicable articles and noted to the paramedic profession, and our study, which included 5. So for the first one up there, this one was just looking at STEMIs, and the students went a couple rounds of testing to give the correlation between the education given and then how they scored on the test. The study showed that STEMI and lead identification by paramedic students was significantly low, but was shown to improve by 30% in the students that had further education and went via a handout and an extra lecture. In the second study noted, paramedics were identifying J points, and they were showed to have major inconsistencies in the accuracy of the ECG interpretation, and so this also kind of proved our theory as well. They did a study on paramedics in the field recognizing STEMIs and showed only 39% were able to recognize them correctly. And for the fourth study, they examined the importance of early recognition in STEMI, and the sooner and more accurate, it actually increased the patient's odd and better outcome once in the hospital. And our last article looked at teaching for these students. They were looking at medical students. So they were tested on their ability to read ECGs. It was found that the ones who were using ECG teaching modules scored higher on the test in confidence when compared to students that did not have access to these teaching modules. So in conclusion, there's a severe lack of research, like everyone else has stated, around this topic, and the research has been done showing both paramedics, medical students lack accuracy and confidence when tested on their ability to correctly identify ECGs. So the main point, why is this important to us as paramedics? The purpose of our study, as has been stated, is to identify how good we can do at interpreting 3-lead, lead 2 ECGs. There have been past studies looking at medical students, nurses, paramedics, and doctors to recognize 12 leads and ST segment interpretations, but none that specifically looked at 3-lead, and as we know, that is our foundation. It is important for paramedics to correctly interpret and identify ECG rhythms. It is essential for best patient outcome, and especially because we are the first ones to see a patient's cardiac condition. Management and treatment of these conditions is dependent on our ability to recognize rhythms. So for our methods, participants were asked to identify the 10 rhythms listed above here. These rhythms were chosen just by their significance pre-hospitally and for symptom relief, treatment, and differential diagnosis for us in the field. The primary goal of our study is to determine accuracy of student interpretation of the rhythms. Our secondary goal is to look at how much time it took to analyze the rhythm to give information on which rhythms are more difficult for the participants. Participants also will note their confidence before and after the Likert, before and after they exercise via a Likert scale to provide some qualitative data. So our study background, our study is very broad. It's the first of its kind, so it is a pilot study. It's not based off of any other existing studies done. We have made the study double-blind as data collectors and data analyzers are completely separate roles completed by different group members. Our study design is observational as we let the participants complete the survey without any alteration, deception, or incentive. So our setting is completed on paramedic students at Fanshawe College year 1 and 2. So in first year, paramedic students spend 4 hours a week in patient care class and 6 hours a week in practical lab class. Second year spend 5 hours in patient care and 6 hours in practical lab. ECG, 3 lead 2 rhythms are taught for approximately 8 hours in first year, and students are meant to enforce these by practicing rhythm interpretation through quizzes completed online, questions on midterm and final examinations, and throughout practicum via lab and placement on the ambulance.
Thank you, Emily. Now we'll hear from Amanda, who's going to be speaking on participants, population, instrumentation, and ethics.
Thanks, Jack. So participants in population, first and second year paramedic students at Fanshawe College was who we were looking to get data analysis from. Our sample size was based on the need for more education towards rhythm interpretation in the early stages of being a student. All group members that are up here were actually excluded from the study completely. Our instrumentation, participants were provided with a questionnaire with the 2 separate Likert scales and a space to record the rhythm interpretation, as Emily had touched on. And Fanshawe's iSimulate was used as our cardiac monitor using the ASLI software. So as you can see up on the screen, that's what we used. So our ethics, so confidentiality remained constant throughout the entire data collection process, and it remained anonymous by running the study in a double-blind fashion. The data collectors performed the study's data collection and remained completely blind to the study results. Data analyzers looked at the results and assigned a number to each survey to ensure confidentiality of the participant. Each participant did not write any personal information on their surveys, so they remained completely anonymous. Participation was completely optional, and each participant signed a letter of informed consent before they started the study. Each participant had the opportunity to opt out during the process of the data collection, but after they had submitted their survey to the data collectors, they were no longer able to opt out just because of anonymized data collection, that we did not have their personal information on there, so they could opt out during the collection, but not afterwards.
Thank you, Amanda. Now we'll hear from Mac, who's going to talk about our outcome measures.
Thank you, Jack. So for our outcome measures, we primarily measured our accuracy, and as well we had 2 secondary measurements, which was time and confidence. So for our primary measurement, the accuracy was a score out of 10, which we deemed a 70% was a success, which we got from the AMCA standard for that testing, which is also 70%. Our secondary measurements, our time, which we began as soon as we showed the participant the rhythm, and then when they told us they had analyzed it. And then finally, for the confidence, we had a 7-point Likert scale at the beginning of the test, and then at the end, after they'd analyzed all the rhythms, and then we just took those 2 scores.
Thank you, Mac. Now we'll hear from Nathan, who's going to be speaking about our procedures and data analysis.
So we conducted the study by asking students who were currently at a self-directed station during their practical lab class if they'd like to participate. All students are welcome to take part, and anyone willing to participate in the study was brought over to the monitor station one by one and provided with a survey. They were asked to complete a letter of informed consent, and then we asked them to fill out the initial Likert confidence scale. We then proceeded to show them 10 ECG rhythms to interpret. Each rhythm was timed, and the time was repeated back to the participant once each rhythm had been completed to their satisfaction. We lastly asked them to complete a secondary Likert confidence scale and then place their survey sheet directly into the collection box to preserve their anonymity. And now onto our data analysis. Of the 10 rhythms that we evaluated, participants were deemed confident and incompetent in only half. As hypothesized, Participants were successful with sinus tachycardia with a score of 83%, sinus bradycardia with a score of 92%, and ventricular tachycardia with a score of 79%. But, contrary to our expectations, participants were deemed incapable of identifying ventricular fibrillation with a score of only 49%. This is also where 35% of participants answered torsade de pointe for ventricular fibrillation, and these were deemed incorrect. It's also of note that only 10% of participants, that's 7 of our 72, were able to properly identify Wolff-Parkinson-White, and 15%, that's also 11 of our 72, who were properly able to identify atrial flutter. It is also important to note that only 24 out of 72 participants received a score of 70% or higher. That's roughly 1/3 of our population. Lastly, it's also important to note that the participants overall received an average of 55%. Now, looking to the confidence scores, we received an average pre-assessment score of 3.4 for the first year class and 4.23 for the second years. Looking at the pre-assessment confidence, we see a high concentration of the first year in the 3 to 4 range, while the second year class is more localized in the 4 to 5 range, showing that the second years felt far more confident going into the assessment. Examining the post-assessment results, we received an average score of 3.67 for the first year class, while the second year class remained constant at 4.23. Looking at the graph, we see a change in certain populations, but the second years remain the same, so they feel more confident after, felt the same going in as they did before, while the first year class felt more confident after completing the survey. Now, looking to mean times for each rhythm, we see little to no difference between the two sample groups. In some cases, the first year participants tend to have a higher interpretation time, but only by a few seconds. Looking at the graph here, we see nearly identical times for some rhythms, such as normal sinus rhythm with PVCs, atrial flutter, and the 2 heart blocks. We see that the groups there are separated noticeably by 2 or more seconds, while other rhythms, such as VTAC, VFib, and sinus bradycardia, are separated by mere tenths of a second.
Thank you, Nathan. Now we'll hear from Chris with our t-test results.
Thank you, Jack. So, from our primary and secondary outcomes, we decided on these 5 questions that we would t-test comparing first and second years. We used IBM SPSS version 25 as our software to compare. NAP 2017 recommends performing a pre-test for any t-test that you want to perform. It should fulfill 3 criteria, the first being you need at least 30 data points per group that you want to compare. We fulfilled this with 36 and 37. The second criteria is normality, which is looking at the distribution of data within the normal bell curve. And that can be calculated or visualized through a histogram as shown above. As you can see, we have one outlier in interpretation time and shockable interpretation time. NAP recommends if you have an outlier that you should remove it, which we did, and after that we pass normality criteria. The last criteria looking is HOV. So HOV is looking at whether the data is actually comparable, apples to apples, not apples to oranges. And it's looking at variance, which is standard deviation squared. And you can calculate it with a p-value of more than 0.05 is considered a pass. So when we did that, as you can see in the chart, there was one that did not make it. So with that data, NAP recommends that any significant outcomes that you get with that is deemed untrustworthy, less trustworthy, or robust. We decided to continue knowing that and just looking out for that. So next was our our first t-test was looking at accuracy. It seemed like second years were more confident, or sorry, on average performed better than first years. However, as you can see, there's no significant result with their p-value, with a p-value of less than 0.05 considered significant. Next, we looked at confidence before, and we found that both groups were moderately confident in themselves. However, first years it showed that second years were significantly more confident than first years going into the study, with a value of 0.003. Next was confidence before, or sorry, confidence after. Should have stuck with an iPad. So confidence after, we found that both groups remained relatively confident, neither changed significantly, and we had no significant p-value found from that. Next, we looked at interpretation time for all 10 rhythms. We found that we did not meet our criteria of under 10 seconds on average for both years. However, second years were faster on average by 2 seconds. There was no significant p-value found. So, lastly, we looked at, we looked at interpretation time for shockable rhythms. There's only 2 in our study. We found no significant p-value with that either. Now, lastly, we looked at accuracy of shockable rhythms. And we were surprised by the fact that we believed it would have been close to 100%. However, there was also no significant difference between them. Now that I've sufficiently bored you with all our data, I will summarize anything you may have missed. So, on average, second years performed slightly better in every criteria we looked at. However, together, we did not do very well, I would say. And the only significant difference we found between our sample groups was confidence before.
Thanks, Chris. Now we'll go to Joey for discussion.
Thanks, Jack. So now that all the data has been relayed to everyone, it is important to use it and kind of discuss the education provided for ECG practice and where we kind of go from here. It is our hope that this study affects the current implementation of resources used surrounding ECG practice, or to inspire other researchers to further investigate the same topic. Throughout this pilot study, and relating back to our literature review, it is evident that paramedics need to be able to recognize underlying rhythms, and various other articles state that this is mostly done by student initiative outside the classroom, is way more beneficial than just learning solely inside the classroom. In accordance with our study directly, the more common rhythms we see, sinus brady, sinus tach, atrial fibrillation, VTach, and normal sinus rhythm, had a higher accuracy. Then a discussion needs to be made on learning ECGs comes with exposure, and maybe the best way to tackle ECG interpretation comes with continuous repetition of the less common ones as well. It is also worth mentioning that we need an increased population size for more accurate results. And although there's a discrepancy between second years being more exposed and first years just recently learning the topic, our data proves the overall accuracy was quite similar between both years. However, identifying shockable rhythms obviously came with more exposure. Although the battle for education continues with research leading the way, it is important to recognize paramedic students cannot currently accurately identify 3 lead 2 rhythm interpretations, which puts us at a disadvantage for the best pre-hospital care.
Thank you, Joey. Now Mac will finish our presentation with the conclusion.
Okay, thank you, Jack. So to conclude, as Joey stated, we found that paramedic students were in fact inaccurate in interpreting ECG rhythms. So we find as a group it's essential that the accuracy and efficiency of doing so is bettered, be that through further education, and for that to effectively happen, more research needs to be done. in the pursuit for the education change. And then with that, I'd like to open the floor to any questions.
Emma, PCP student. Can you remind me, when did you do the research on the second years and the first years? Like what dates?
Okay, thank you. So we did the second years in December, so this past December, and we did examine the first years the third week in February. I believe Chris had mentioned they've been learning them for about 2 weeks at this point. Yeah.
So do you believe that the strike may have affected grades due to 5 weeks of not doing much?
Yeah, that was definitely something that kind of changed, especially with being out of school for 5 weeks. You were removed from that, especially with the first years missing out on their 5 first rounds. We do believe that could have changed it, and especially with us second years. I don't know how many people had practiced kind of throughout, and we did it when we were still in third semester, and I knew we were busy with everything else, so I don't know how much rhythm review was done. So that's why we had noted it as a limitation as well. Sure, thank you.
Hi, Chris. For the shockable rhythms, saying they misidentified them, did you guys look at whether they just misidentified name and which shockable rhythm it was, as opposed to the fact that it is just shockable and not at all?
So, hi Chris. It's good meeting you. So we did have a breakdown of each rhythm initially. However, we had some time constraints with our presentation, so we removed that data. However, we will pull up. No, we don't have one. Okay. We did have it, but we were planning to pull it up. But unfortunately, I guess we're not. For the one you're talking about with ventricular fibrillation, torsades was, I believe it was 25%? 35% of wrong answers were towards that one. So a large percentage.
But was it that they're not recognizing that it is shockable or not, or that they're just mistaking, like maybe if they answered VFib for VTAC or VTAC for VFib, they might have mistaken which one, but they're still recognizing that it was still a shockable rhythm? Is there?
I understand. Okay, I understand. We weren't looking at whether the participant would shock that rhythm or not shock that rhythm. We were just looking at whether they could identify it or not.
Thanks.
Hi, Jacob McLean, PCP student. When looking at the accuracy for VFib, I believe Nathan mentioned that some people were answering torsades. Did you at all consider keeping that as accurate, as it is a type of VFib, and we know we can shock it as well?
We were just assessing for the our initial correct answer that we were looking at. So for that rhythm, we were just looking for answers of VFib. So anything other than that was excluded and counted as incorrect.
Do you think that maybe if you were to keep that in, like, do you think that that might have skewed your results?
Just so like we kept it, what we stated as like what we wanted to see, just for people who necessarily didn't put the correct rhythm. Say, for example, for like normal sinus rhythm, we wanted that not someone to say normal or sinus, or someone said for sinus tags it said fast or something like that. Like we want the answers to be what we were looking for, so there's not any interpretation miscues or anything like that.
Okay, thanks.